Hello and welcome back to another episode of Growing with My Fellow Growers. Slight delay to the start today, but we are back as always, joined by an amazing panel. I'm going to kick it over first to Spartan Grown. Welcome back, Spartan.
Thanks, Jack. Happy to be here. Shout out to everybody in chat. Spartan Grown. You can find me on Instagram. It's all one word, Spartan Grown, no spaces, and that's the only social media that I have an account on. So everybody else is just a pretender. You can shoot me an email at spartangrown@gmail.com if you don't have Instagram, and I can help you with all your growing questions.
Happy to have you back. And next up, we've got Matthew Gates.
Hey everyone, it's Matthew Gates. I'm an integrated pest management specialist. I'm curious to see what we have today to talk about on the podcast. I actually do have a couple of subjects I'd like to talk about. So it'll be very interesting, I think, and it has to do with home growers and how we not spread pests to other people, essentially. So I'm looking forward to talking about that. And if you want to know more, you can find my social media at SyncAngel, or you can follow me on Twitter at SyncAngel. The other one was on Instagram, sorry, and on Zenthanol YouTube channel.
Happy to have you back, and glad you could let the people know where they can find you with all that good information and back catalog of great content to figure out about IPM and other pest management related information. Great stuff as always. Next up, the American one.
Hello, Jack panel and everyone in chat. It's always good to be here and good to see everyone. I'm the American one on YouTube and the American one _with_Keens on the IG. And yeah, you guys might know Amy Aces. If you type in amyaces.com, it'll bring you to the Daga Gardens website where you could get some Amy Aces. So I guess I'll throw that out there. And yeah, peace, everyone.
Pretty cool to see and hear about that. I know Amy Aces is internationally known, people growing it across the pond and all over here in the US, and pretty cool to see one of your own original creations taken off in so many different gardens, and people seem to be pretty happy with it, quality, and so really cool, good stuff. And I know Matthew mentioned a couple topics, and we'll definitely get into those as well, but I want to also mention that we're going to be taking questions from the chat, and since we have a short panel this week at the 1 hour mark, probably going to be sending the Zoom link off into the YouTube for anybody who would like to go ahead and jump onto the panel and show off their garden, or ask questions live, or just hang out and shoot the breeze with us for a little bit. But without further ado, I guess I'll pass it back to Matthew, and you could start us off with your topic for the week.
Okay, sure. So basically, the question is this. We're all home growers, not all of us, but many people who watch are, and obviously it's a cheap home grow podcast. So I'm a supporter of people growing, and I don't want anyone to confuse what I'm going to say with some sort of lack of support or anything like that. I also support people growing their own food if they can, or just growing plants that they want to grow just in general. It doesn't have to even be a use for them necessarily, although I am kind of a detractor when it comes to lawns in general. But many years in Southern California, and the use of water has kind of colored that perspective. But anyways, my point is this. There's a lot of pests out here, and recently I've been getting many pests, new pests that I've been encountering from people sending me pictures and videos. Not always identifiable, but sometimes identifiable to a point. And because I know people in professional settings and also in home grow settings are dealing with such pests, hot plate and viroid's a big one. Obviously something that plagues all the commercial grows, but also people's home grows in some cases. And then also various like insects and mites and things like this. Biosecurity is important, but in some cases, these pests are so difficult to deal with that if they get into a new location or new place, they can change that whole habitat forever, or for an extremely long period of time and a very expensive period of time for people who want to grow. Sorry, this is sort of a long-winded pretext, but I guess what I'm asking is how do we as growers, I'm curious what the audience thinks and also what the panel thinks, how do we as growers sort of rectify the fact that there are going to be people who aren't really going to care or take the time to care about various pests? There are agricultural pests that get onto like fruits and produce and things that we grow, and then we exchange that into different places, and then it spreads. Firewood, for example, is the main way that a lot of these really nefarious boring beetles get around in California and other parts of the world. And then when they get into this new location, they cause like terrible, almost sort of unfixable damage. And so far they have in a lot of cases. So what do we do when it comes to something like hot plate and viroid that is very easy to pass, very difficult for people to see its symptoms if they even present, are sort of inconspicuous in some cases. You can confuse them with other stuff. You know, and it's also very difficult to know for sure that you have it unless you like take, you know, some sort of a sophisticated test, which people might not have the resources to do, or the presence of mind to do. I guess, like, how do we keep the community sharing while we also consider the biosecurity threat of some of these pests? You know what I mean? Typically what the government, like the USA, does is we have quarantine pests, and if they detect it or if they find it, then oftentimes they destroy it, so that it doesn't like get into another location. Obviously, there's some opinions about that sort of a thing, and cannabis is particularly special in that way. But I kind of leave it there. Basically, the thesis statement is, how do we spread things, or how do we keep things from being spread, even things that are really difficult for us to tell? And how do we, as a responsible community, kind of juxtapose those two things?
Well, my answer, I think, is kind of comes from it's always information, right? So I think the best thing that we can do, or anyone can do, is be aware of the situation, be aware of what to look for. You can see some of these signs before you accept clones and cuttings from, especially if you have a chance to see the mother plant too. Another thing though is that we have techniques to, I don't want to use the word remediate so much. We have techniques to prevent these things, or to cure these things with like tissue culture and things like that. Now that's not reachable for the common person at the cost that it is now, but if the knowledge was shared enough to enough people, and you're able, I mean, there's a lot of these home mycologists. If you're a home mycologist, you can pretty much grasp the same concepts that it takes for tissue culture and probably be successful doing it in your own home. With that knowledge, if people had those kinds of knowledges, they could help to maybe not eradicate these diseases, but sure slow them down. Without having,
I agree with that.
strength,
I think,
you know?
I think knowing is very important in that way. I think that's step 0 for sure.
Yeah, I think the term ignorance is bliss can be nice sounding, but when it comes down to the actual brass tacks and you have to get shit done and you're responsible for the success of a cultivation, you can't just say, oh, ignorance is bliss. Like, hopefully this cut is what it says it is. Hopefully this cut is clean, because that can cost you thousands or millions of dollars and completely destroy your entire operation. So with Matthew's kind of question in perspective, yes, there are a few fields of thought. At least the way I would look at it, there are the people that are not going to bring in anything. They're going to, you know, I mean, you bring in something with seeds, right? So seeds are potentially a vector, but there are going to be the people that just pop their own seeds, hunt their own clones, and grow everything in-house, which, not to say it guarantees a clean start, but it limits a lot of the vectors for pests and mildews and molds and things like that can be easily introduced by bringing in live plant tissue via a clone. So you've got that kind of group of people, but then you've also got the group of people who want the newest, hottest cut, and they're going to take in cuts. And whether there's stuff out there or not, they're hop latent viroid allegedly was spread around on Gorilla Glue, like one of the most common of all cuts. And a bunch of people still love Gorilla Glue. It's great. It's a great strain. It might have ruined their gardens for a period of time, but they might not have even known that they had it because they never had it before it had hop latent viroid. So they just got it with it and kind of dealt with it. That's in particular one because it's latent. You might not even really realize it. You may not, if you've never had it without hop latent viroid, not know what its potential to yield and terpenes and cannabinoid tests will be without it. So it's tough, but like other stuff that can just straight up kill your crops, like russet mites, for example, or other things that are hard to see that will just devastate your crop. They have to be accounted for. I mean, there's no ifs, ands, or buts about it. If you bring it in, it is going to cause you a giant headache. So, with that in mind, you kind of have to choose, I think, which field you're going to be in, not to like make it black and white or like this box, that box, but a lot of people, I think, are going to take in clones, whether there's risks to it or not, and whether they can mitigate all of them or not. They're going to take clones in and try their best. I mean, most people will just look at it and say, okay, I don't see any pests, I don't see any molds or mildews, it's fine. Then there are other people that will take it the next step and say, I'm going to quarantine it for a week or 2 weeks or a month or until it's growing healthy, and I can guarantee to some extent that it's not going to cause problems in my other area. And even that doesn't necessarily 100% guarantee you, but there are steps to those processes that can mitigate or minimize the amount of risk that you're taking when you bring in a live plant.
Yeah, I think the best step is to just treat it as if it just assume it has something. So in your quarantine, hit it with everything. Hit it with all your IPM. Fuck it. You don't have anything really to lose to do that at that early of a stage. You got this whole life to grow out of. It's not, hopefully you're not using anything systemic. Even if you are, it's hopefully out of the plant by the time it's flowered, because this is at the very beginning stages. So
I wouldn't
time.
hope for that, because I've seen Subcool got a cut with something that was systemic, and like in the hash, like 6 generations later, it was still testing positive for shit. So, I mean,
Jesus Christ.
That's amazing.
Terrible. That's
Yeah.
why GML, he had to have his cuts sent out and tested for everything, and a lot of them weren't clean, because you can't risk running a room and then losing everything.
That's what systemic
Crazy.
means. So yeah, it's in the plant.
So there's another thing. You could do the insurance aspect like that, and you could just take that cutting and go get that a piece of, you know, a leaf or something tested and see what exactly if it does have anything or not.
Yeah, knowledge is power. I mean, like, so the opposite of ignorance is bliss. If you don't know, you don't know. And when you test, you have an idea of, like, Kyle sent off one of his clones a while ago, and we read off the whole list of the Tobago mosaic viruses and, you know, like hop latent viroid. And they tested it for like 15 different things. And it's not everything, but at least it's a clean bill of health from these top 15, most likely, or whatever, to be coming across. And it might cost a pretty penny. I'm not sure what those costs of those tests actually are. Matthew, I'm curious, do you have an idea of what it would cost to send a clone in to get sort of a clean bill of health, or to identify if it does have a pathogen?
Yeah, it definitely depends on the pathogen. So like, for example, well, for one thing, there's like the cost, like we started at the very beginning, there's just the cost of, like, in a lot of cases for a pathology test. Kind of depends on what you're thinking it might be, but usually, like in my experience, you might be giving them like the whole plant, potentially, not like the whole plant like with the cannabis plant, but like in cases where I've had to take those samples, a lot of times, like even if the plant's dead, we might like chop the root ball from the rest of the plant or something like that, potentially, and then send the whole thing over. This was like with Gerbers, for example, which is not totally the same thing here. And as far as price, so like you're losing a plant is what I'm trying to say. If you think that something's wrong, but like it doesn't look like it's totally dead yet, a lot of times there's like that culling cost. And then I think like it can be close to $100, sometimes a little bit more, sometimes a little bit less, like per sample. And I think usually that's because they have to cover, of course, they have to cover the technical costs of the labor, but also there's a bunch of consumables that are used up in the process of looking for various pathogens. Sometimes that's not necessary, you know, it depends on the problem.
I'd say most places you're going to spend over like $100 to get an ounce of cannabis. I don't know if that's the case for everybody, but on the street, I'd say that's pretty fair. At least $100 for an ounce of like really good quality cannabis. So if you can expect 1 ounce of cannabis out of your plant, then I guess you could justify that cost to some extent of like, I know I'm at least going to get an ounce out of this plant. So if I spend $100 to test it, maybe I'll get 3, 5, 7, 10 ounces out of it. And so I made something back from it. Although there's electricity, nutrients, lighting, all the other stuff that goes into it. I think it can be one of those cost analyses that might be worthwhile, especially if it's like a clone that you really like, or it has like a lot of provenance. Like Gorilla Glue 4, for example. It might be a bummer if you spend $100 just to find out that it is infected with hop latent viroid, and then maybe you can't do shit about it because you're not going to spend 10K to get it tissue cultured and heat treated and cold treated and bleach
It's still less
sterilized.
of a bummer to pay for one plant than to pay for a whole room of plants.
That's true. And it depends what you're cultivating for. If you're just growing for your own head, it's different than if you're growing like a 100 lighter or something like that, and you've got thousands of dollars invested just in the first month of electricity, like the bills and all that good stuff. But for most home growers, it's kind of like I'd say it's a pretty steep investment, actually, like $100, although it might not seem like a crazy amount of money, especially when I was comparing it to like an ounce cost. It can still be just like, maybe you'd spend that $100 on food or water or gas or something else in your life that could be better use. But at the same time, it depends on, like I said, how much does that plant mean to you? Is it something that you want to have around? Have you found like, oh, this fire OG does really good for my nerve pain, like my one buddy's dad. So he keeps the fire OG around because it helps him a lot. And if something were to happen to that, or if he started noticing like it was falling off, maybe he tested and be like, oh, it's got this, and I wonder if there's anything I can do about it. And Spartan's point that he made earlier, tissue culture is actually, the knowledge and the experience is what's expensive. The actual materials, I mean, you could make yourself a tissue culture kit for like 40 or $50, but knowing how to do it with cleanliness and sterilization and, without a flow hood or whatever to make sure that everything is absolutely as it needs to be, can, be more difficult than it might look. But if you can do it yourself, you might be able to clean up some of those clones. And I don't know if it's the heat treatment, the cold treatment, the tissue culture, or the bleach, but I know that like all three of those things have been talked about in treating for hop latent viroid, and or just cleaning up a old cut that might have some pathogens lingering along. And I almost wonder how much of it is, like we talked about this in the past episode, but somal clonal variation, like how much of it is not a virus or a viroid or something, and maybe the genes are just changing. It's gotten older. It's, like elderly people, they slow down, they don't perform as well. But
hey. No, I'm kidding.
In some aspects, they have better crystallized intelligence, but like their fluid intelligence drops, as an example, in humans. But with like a plant, I'd wonder, like a 20-year-old clone, like a Chem 91, right? It's been going around since 1991. Does that plant have the same vigor that it had in 1991? I would question that.
Or the same
seriously.
production. Yeah. No, yeah. I think the point that you also made that was really critical was that like with hop latent viroid, for example, or like other problems, if you've never grown the plant before, and you don't know its characteristics, especially if it's very unique for like the species of plant you're growing. I'm talking more generally, but in cannabis too, right? Then like you might not know if you've never seen like what regular looks like. You might not know what you're dealing with is actually kind of stunted or something like this. So like, again, of course, experience is important. Having that sort of like solid knowledge foundation is important. And I think we kind of have like a September never ends situation, kind of like it's often described with like in the beginning of the internet, with AOL and things like that, which isn't really the beginning, but like people who had access to computers when computers were less common, it's kind of like you had this sort of seasonal influx of new users. And I think that was associated with like people getting older, or like it being like summertime or something like this, where there's like more free time for people. But like nowadays, there's no season. Like anyone can just hop onto the internet or whatever. And so there's always going to be constantly, and of course with cannabis, there's more and more growers, more and more professional growers, more and more home growers. Also globally, it's happening more often. And I like to see it, but also this creates sort of like an incubating effect. And certainly there's a lot of precedent with other crops, right? And there's a few pests even right now that I could perhaps say, if I wanted to be if I wanted to grandstand, I might say it's our grape phylloxera moment, right? Like the phylloxerans that decimated vineyards in the United States and Europe, for example. It changed entirely how grapes growing for wine in particular was. So, or like with hops, hop latent viroid is owed to hops before cannabis, right? and the solution to that was growing resistant cultivars and not really growing other stuff. And like, I think whenever I bring this up to people, understandably, it sounds like very horrific. That would be a death knell to a lot of the community outreach and stuff, and how people interact with the plant. I don't know. What are your thoughts on that? Like, that would be terrible for the community if we couldn't grow certain things.
Well, here's a simple solution that's under $100. This is I've mentioned them in the past for sex testing, Farmer Freeman EasyXY. You can see farmerfreeman.com here. I'm featuring on the share screen for the podcast listeners if you want to go check it out afterwards. But Farmer Freeman has recently started offering a $50 virus detection trio, which is $50, and it has hoplite, viroid, CCV, and LCV. They also do single tests such as powdery mildew detection, and you can get individual tests, I believe, for hoplite and viroid as well. And shout out to Flora Nugs, who just sent this to me in the DM, because I actually had not known until today that they offered powdery mildew detection and hoplite viroid. Matthew, do you know what CCV and LCV are? I should just click on it.
Yeah, that's cannabis cryptic virus and lead sclerosis virus,
yep.
Which I have videos for both on my channel. If you've never heard of these before and you want to learn more about them, they're kind of still weird cannabis arcana, but definitely learn more about them.
Yeah, so I just thought that was a cool little thing to mention because they're a cannabis grower themselves. I've mentioned that many times in the past. They don't just do sex testing. They actually are a home grower. They grow some dank. If you look at their page, they've posted many photos of their own homegrown good cannabis, and it's pretty cool. They've got themselves the devices that are necessary. I think it's I can't remember the actual name. It's the same thing they use to test COVID with, they spin around PCR device, I think that's what it's called.
Yeah, PCR, I think you mean.
Yeah, so a PCR is used by Farmer Freeman to detect the white powdery mildew, to lettuce sclerosis virus, to the cannabis cryptic virus, and the hoplite and viroid. So for half the price, and we were speculating earlier, I mean, $50 is a lot less than $100. So even right there, and you get 2 other tests as well. And not that that's going to be a clean bill of health, but at least you get 3 of the major ones. And powdery mildew is a little bit more specific, and I think if you're having those issues, you'll be able to figure it out relatively quickly. But it's always good to have that test in case, like my wife, for example, is very sensitive to, I can't just say all white powdery mildew, because I know that there's like 30 or 40 different strains or something, maybe even more, hundreds probably. And the one that she consumed got her very, very sick, but didn't have much effect on myself or Matthew. And it's interesting learning about that kind of stuff, because some people have to avoid it much, much more if they're.
Would it be possible for a strain to test positive? Like it would have, for example, hoplite and viroid, but not exhibit any of the, because it's latent, it's just chilling out there. It hasn't expressed itself yet.
Absolutely.
Could it be possible. So yeah,
I don't think you would know in
veg.
veg. Like from what I've seen, I saw he's in Oregon. I can't think of his name. Medicropper, I think.
Medicropper, yeah.
He had a lot of hoplite and viroid going on, and he showed plants like in veg you couldn't tell, but in flower they kind of get like this weak kind of stem, and they'd start flopping over onto each other, and like one leaf would touch another leaf to the other plant. And you could see like the plant right next to it where it touched it. You could literally see it like starting to get sick from that branch down to the rest of the plant. So I think that one's a contact and not systemic. So like it will infect. And Matthew could correct me if I'm wrong on this, but I think it is regional to the plant. Like, so if its top leaves are being touched by another plant with the top leaves, that's where it's going to start first before it might spread to the rest of the plant.
Yeah, I think that's generally true. But like you say, like as a plant like ages, even like that can totally change how the pathogen kind of moves around the plant. But and like you're saying, Spartan, it's definitely true where like you could have like the what's happening, in very, very much of a nutshell, is the viroid gets into the cells of the plant somehow, some way, and then basically, since the viroid, unlike viruses, it doesn't encode any genes. It doesn't need the cell to it needs the cell to make more of itself, but it doesn't need to make like a protein shell and all this other stuff. So some of the main damage that it does is it just uses up all of the cellular machinery that's going to be meant to make a bunch of RNA and DNA to express genes and do other stuff. That doesn't happen. Instead, it gets all taken up by the hot latent viroid as it builds and builds and builds and moves into more and more cells. And so in that way, it can be there, but you might not see the effects of like the somoclonal variation we were talking about earlier. You know, some of these effects can be subtle, or essentially they don't like express, you know, we don't see it until the population is like manyfold more. And then at that point, you know, it's it's there. And yeah, that's kind of, yeah, it's scary. It's a scary problem. And I'm concerned that it's something we might not be, we have enough trouble with things that we can see with our eyes that just happen to be like resistant to the plants and all of our products or our biocontrols. So like, yeah, I mean, it's not news to make these points, but I hope that we as a community can like attack this thing good and not like I guess all get colonized and stuff and not even know it necessarily.
Hot latent viroid is probably one of the biggest talked about things in the cannabis community in the past few years. And I know, I'm sure that they don't like it when people bring this up, but the group out here in California, Dark Heart Nursery, was pretty notorious for spreading it. And then coming out with a discovery of what it is, coming out with, well, they didn't discover it necessarily, but like posting it to the cannabis community, making it more widely known, and then inventing a cure that they would go and so like they sold people the infection and then turn around and sell them the cure, which I think is a little bit dubious at the very least. But the thing that I had to say about that, I guess, is to Matthew, do you have any thoughts or knowledge on, like, have you worked with any of the groups that have gone through the process of doing something like sending it off to tissue culture, getting it heat treated, cold treated, bleached, or whatever needs to be done, and then seeing the plants kind of before and after? And do you have thoughts on, do those processes, are they showing to be successful? Are they working? Are people getting back up and running with essentially clean, healthy plants?
Yes, but success is almost totally dependent on being able to keep yourself from getting reinfected, which is true for other pests too. So in that way, it's very similar to your rice root aphid, to your russet mite, to your spider mite. You know, they don't come from nowhere. They don't just come from the ether. They get there somehow into your crop. You know, and there's a like we've been growing plants for a long time. There's also been viruses and viroids in other plant crops that we have like biosecurity ideas for. So it's not like we've never dealt with anything like this ever as humans. But the problem is that at a commercial level or even at a home grow level, do you have the wherewithal, the resources, the knowledge, the domain knowledge to like be able to prevent it? Because you got it, sure. Well, where did it come from? If you can't identify that, it'll happen again, most likely. And of course, the obvious vectors are things like your personnel. If they grow, for example, or something like that, they might have vectored a pest. If they very often, like you kind of mentioned, it can be the case where nurseries can vector pests and other sorts of things like that. Sometimes what even happens is that the nursery, they check and they didn't have any problem. And then in transport, there was something in the transport or something gets into them during transport. That can happen too, in which case it's not the cultivator's fault. It's not the nursery's fault. It was from the transport. And that happens sometimes as well.
It does. One
Matthew,
thing
I'm
that
glad you said that, because I hear so many people complain to me. They'll hit me up and they'll say, I'm not even going to name the breeders, but so I got a clone from such and such breeder at such and such event, and it had XYZ pest. I'm like, bro, it was outside.
Yeah.
It means it sat outside all day. And you're going to blame that on the breeder? Are you kidding me?
Yeah, I mean, it's right. It could be very well what you just said, and if you're not accounting for that, 'cause it's easy to just, it's an antagonistic process sometimes, growing
Or
things and
or it was already in their garden and they didn't want to admit it to themselves. They bring that clone
yes, that
home and then they
happens
start
too.
seeing it and they go, "Oh, this fucker gave me spider mites." And it's like,
Oh,
dude, you
I didn't
had
even
spider
consider
mites the
that.
whole time and you just weren't admitting it to yourself. And like the other one that cracks me up is Matthew mentioned this many times ago, but there was a cultivator who had a setup where there was grass right outside the
Yeah.
cultivation, and the grass was really high, overgrown, and they would walk through it to get to the indoor every single time. So he walked through there and he's like, "You guys are getting reinfected." They cleaned everything up, and then they'd get reinfected. They cleaned everything up and got reinfected, and they're like, "Hey, Matthew, like, what's going on? Like, can you come check out our site, evaluate everything?" And when he went there, he saw the grass was too close to the doors, and people were walking through it and dragging pests in on their clothes, essentially, and cut that down, throw rocks down around, problem solved. It wasn't an issue of like the veg room being dirty or the flower room being dirty or this being dirty. It was like they were literally tracking it in every day, just walking from the parking lot into the building. So something that simple. I mean, it can literally be that simple. You could have the perfect IPM sprays, perfect rotation, but if you just keep reintroducing the pest every single day because you're walking across a patch of grass that is infected with a bunch of them, then you're setting yourself up for failure, no matter how good your IPM consultant is, unless they're able to, like Matthew in that case, point that out for you, that it can just be a physical proximity issue. And there's things that you can do to mitigate that even. So worth checking out all aspects before you spend a bunch of money to tissue culture and bleach or heat treat or whatever, just to find out, by the way, my one mother that I've been keeping has hot plate viroid that I didn't do any treatment to, and that's just going to keep on spreading it through the rest of the cultivation or something like
Well, yeah,
that.
the first time you take cuts off that, and then you cut something else, and you cut something else,
Yeah.
you just fucking spread it all the way through.
It's crazy. I mean, it's really tough with the stuff that we literally cannot see. Like, can you really blame a cultivator?
No, I
when you
mean,
can't see it.
This is
Yeah.
gonna sound terrible, but this is straight Spartan honesty here. And it's like, in today's day and age, people, there are so many at least decent genetics out there. A lot of them. I mean, you can just throw a fucking dart at a dartboard and probably hit some decent genetics. If something's starting to struggle, just fucking get rid of it. Just fucking get rid of it. I mean, unless it's that one strain that is the only thing you've ever found to work for you. I mean, it's not worth the struggle when you can pop something new and find something, maybe better.
Look for a cross of it. So many of those Chem 91s have been crossed into, if you go look at Lucky Dog seeds, the guy who held on to the Chem when, the guy who actually found the Chem wasn't really cultivating it anymore. They had Lucky Dog, I'm trying to think, Skunk VA. They sometimes call it the Skunk VA Chem because he's the one who kept it alive. He showed it to the forums. He posted pictures of it. He held on to it. He shared the cut. And although it is still around, you can still find some pure old Chem 91. There's a bunch of killer ass Chem crosses. Chem Double D, like a Dog Patch. Like there's so many. Great. If you want that killer Chem, super high potency, funk, just like smack you over the head, strong high, that exists. And you don't need to have the actual cut. You don't have to risk getting the hot latent viroid. You can buy a pack of seeds where the breeder is pretty reliable and consistent. And I haven't really seen, and other than the occasional white paper, whenever I bring this up, I haven't seen people getting things vectored from seeds. I know that hot latent viroid was just recently proven that it could transfer through seeds, but I haven't seen a ton of examples of it being demonstrated. And maybe we just don't know about it yet, but I'm curious. If you had to guess, Matthew, I know it's kind of a shot in the dark, but what percent would you guess would be coming from a clone and like mechanical transmission versus coming from seeds through that transmission?
I mean, it's definitely a shot in the dark. I think the intellectually honest answer is, I think even the experts don't necessarily know as much as they wish they did. I feel like it is a lot of it is through like mechanical transmission, through like cuts and things like that, and like the equipment you use to cut, right? And then like the fluid inside the plant then gets transferred to another plant and to another plant. And I think that is probably the primary way. If I was going to guess, right?
But vertical transmission, I think is what they call it when it's
horizontal transmission.
Horizontal transmission from a parent to the offspring via seed.
That's vertical.
Okay, yeah.
Sorry.
So that's what I was talking about. The vertical transmission is possible technically,
Yeah.
at least from what the scientists are saying, from what I've seen.
Yeah, there's some reports that show like some percentage of plants, but like this is the thing about this is that if I remember correctly, that if I'm remembering the research, it's kind of older, and also it's in a laboratory setting, so it's kind of like a hypothetical thing. Whether or not it's happening a lot in the field is like the real question, and that's where I think like the really important kind of research can be done if you're replicating those situations. Of course, it takes more money and resources and time to do this sort of a thing. I'm not saying that these scientists are hacks or terrible people for not doing that. There might not have been the money and the research gumption for that. Maybe there is now though, but that's how a lot of plant viruses get moved between plants and many other crops. So I think that's a pretty safe bet that that's happening in cannabis because biosecurity in cannabis I think is generally lower than in other crops, but that could just be a stereotype. I mean, it really just depends on.
No, it for sure is, because I can tell you just, and this is like because of how the market is regulated, which is like lots of unregulation.
I mean, yes, right. If we bring that up, then yes, I definitely agree with that point.
And just like based on what I know, and this is anecdotal, but I know at least 1,000 growers who have sent or traded cuts to each other across state lines, across country lines, who have done something which technically would be illegal. If I was to send you corn from Ohio to California, it would get confiscated. So there are ag laws that prevent certain pests from coming in, and they take it very seriously. Like I've always mentioned, whenever I come back from Arizona to California, they stop the people with the fruit trucks and look at them more intensely than like any of the personal citizens or whatever passenger cars. They're looking more for fruit violations than they are for like drug violations or gun violations or anything else.
Yeah.
Is pretty eye-opening, because California being, I think, like the 5th largest economy in the entire world, most of that comes from agriculture and horticulture. And if we were to just willy-nilly let whatever fruit truck come in from Mexico or Arizona that has a different pest population, it could cause literally billions of dollars worth of damage, like we're seeing with Florida, the citrus greening disease. I don't know if that was a foreign pest, but just a pest in general that can cause tons and tons of damage and not have a immediately available either pesticide or a natural predator, because it being invasive, there's not a natural predator for it. So then it spreads like wildfire and causes shit tons of problems. So,
and you know what, the main thing, you bringing that up, first of all, good news, everyone. There is a lot of really good control happening in California citriculture for the huanglong being, which is the disease caused by the bacteria caused by the psyllid that colonizes citrus. But you know what? You know why it was so difficult to deal with in Florida and in California, but particularly California? It's because people grow citrus. It's because commercial growers are under threat. But we were seeing a lot more in urban areas where people were growing not only citrus for fruit that they would use, but also like basically ornamental citrus. And like, that could be somebody's yard that they never didn't touch in 25 years, right? But the plant's still there and it still gets irrigated or whatever. It's still alive, and that's a host, right? So like, I'm not saying that the solution is like when we have a citrus, emergency, that everyone has to get rid of their citrus. I don't think that's the appropriate response, but that's an important factor to consider, I guess. And like Spartan said, I feel like the number one thing is educational outreach, but I don't think it's, it's sort of passive, because somebody can decide to learn that or not. It's kind of hard to force that.
I also wanted to say though, too, in your opening question, you kind of alluded to, it'd be terrible if we were regulated to growing only certain things, and immediately what's going to jump into my head when you say that. It's like they try to regulate it completely, and it never stopped us. So I don't think that will ever stop. So I think the better approach is education and like what we're doing here, to just be like, well, look, we know it's there and we know it's going to be a problem, so please try to mitigate this problem. I think that's a better approach, because Yeah, there's no way it's going to be at this point. The genie is out of the lamp, and it's not fitting back in. It's going to be out there, and there's I don't care how much control you think you have. I mean, they're growing it in Russia, they're growing it in fucking North Korea, they're growing it everywhere where you're not supposed to grow it. In Japan, they're still doing it. So I don't think it'll ever be a case to where it can be controlled to that extent.
Well, my question, well, and you make a good point about the allusion to like regulatory bodies. Like obviously they're not 100, even if I were to agree or disagree, they're not 100% effective, right? So you would
Right.
want something more robust anyways, and information and education is more important, I think. But also, even if there were no regulations, sometimes what happens is like for example, if you wanted to, you could grow hops in your backyard, right? At
Right.
least where I live.
Right.
But like the problem or some other pest, it would be a problem because it doesn't matter that there's no regulations against it. The pest presence would be so severe that if you grew those other vulnerable plants potentially, they wouldn't produce very well, or they might die, and
Right. And
like
ultimately,
what
they're
we
just
see with the
providing a host for
bananas.
more pests.
Or yeah, exactly. Yeah, and then you don't get anything, and then everyone else in the tri-state area gets a problem, and it's like, I can see how like, you know, uh, shame-based cultures start to sort of
Yeah.
develop out of that. Like, why are you, messing everyone else up? Kind of a similar debate with regards to like outdoor hemp and pollen,
Yeah.
I was
right?
just
I
going
was
to bring
just
that up.
thinking
I
that.
was
My
literally going
mind
to
was
say
going the
that
same place.
because
We,
when you were talking about people growing citrus and just kind of letting it go outside, even non-hemp, like even just cannabis, if somebody grows a male cannabis plant and they just buy a pack of regular seeds, and in California, everybody can grow sticks. Thankfully, in some regards, they did ban outdoor cultivation for 67% of California. So two-thirds of California, you're not just going to have random males blowing off pollen. And Humboldt County banned all cultivation of hemp in general. So there's no hemp cultivation in Humboldt County because they know their high dollar, their high crop is coming from the THC side. That's where their legacy lies. But like in the Central Valley, where there's not a sort of long history of high quality cannabis, they can grow hemp outdoors, which could potentially fuck over the neighboring farms if they're trying to grow THC crops. Because especially if they're growing the hemp for seed, then there's going to be a ton of males and tons of pollen. And as we've seen with Spain and Morocco, there's pollen that can literally fly miles, especially overnight. In the nighttime, pollen can, without the sun messing it up, the UV will kill off pollen over a certain amount of time. But in the nighttime, it can blow over oceans and lakes and bodies of water and end up in a different country. So if we're talking in the same state, in the same county, yeah, straight pollen, even a single male plant, or if you threw out six and for some reason got unlucky and you didn't know anything about cannabis and all six of them were males, you just let them go and you're like, oh, I'm going to have so much dank bud. And then you just end up with a fuck ton of pollen and no bud. But it is possible. And I'm sure people have run into issues with that. And going back to the education thing, like educating your neighbor, making sure that they're not just growing males, or if they're going to grow, maybe start them with some femmes or some clones that they can throw outside and get themselves some flower and, get into it the right way without potentially harming themselves or the people around them.
In my hazelnut video, or hazelnut powdery mildew video, I explained that interestingly, it seems like there's a preponderance for powdery mildew species to like start isn't really the right word here, but basically there's populations that exist in various places, and they can even travel across like the ocean, like Jack was saying here. So like, and like it might take some time for it to move from like maybe like Turkey, for example, where a lot of hazelnuts are produced, to like different parts of the world, and then like these spores, they just get into the jet stream and they move great distances, and it happens. And like it's like the micro scale situation is like you're growing on your property, but your neighbor right next to you has like an ant mound and he can't like get rid of these ants, or there's pests coming from their backyard to your backyard. Well, when it's countries and provinces and like entire geopolitical economic zones, it does kind of make sense that we can all be on the same page. But that's a story as old as time, very difficult to achieve. and I'm very I'm concerned also that like looking forward a little bit, maybe the things that make cannabis cultivation so difficult might even be things that lie right, totally outside of like how well we cultivate, how sustainably we cultivate, which are things that I care very deeply about. um I run with the regenerative agriculture type folk, and I consider myself a supporter of that movement. But like, I know I've read some research that looks at some aspects of regenerative agriculture, and it was interesting to read sort of the opinion that if we don't consider socio-political aspects, right, like, like for example, legislation or lack of legislation, or things that are maybe restrictive that don't actually do anything but harm people who are growing, and like identifying problems like that. um, Things are more complicated than get some land, grow some food, and not worry about anything, because like people were doing that for a long time, and that certainly wasn't the panacea for all life's problems. So I
It's
just
the Humboldt
wonder.
County motto, though. I mean, the
Yeah,
back to the
well.
land movement. A lot of them did
Yeah.
it to grow their own food and then got into weed just to be able to afford, paying off the land and living up there. But something 710 Canuck mentioned in the chat, we talked a little bit about earlier. I asked Matthew to take a stab in the dark. I do appreciate that he didn't just throw out a random number, because it's good to come from a place of data and science. 710 Canuck says reports show 10 to 15% estimates for hop latent viroid vertical transmission. They didn't link any studies or data or anything, so I'm not sure where that's coming from, but that was in response to a medically fit comment earlier. So it just gives me an idea that around 90% ish. And again, that's just a guess, or some study that they did that might be entirely inaccurate. Maybe there's some insufficiencies with the study. Maybe 100% of it was actually mechanically transmitted, but they thought that seeds were transmitting it because they couldn't track the fact that these plants over here that had hop latent viroid, they didn't realize that transferred it to another one. They're like, oh, that plant started from a seed and it's got hop latent viroid, so maybe it must have been vertically transmitted or something like that.
Or what if the viroids that are here now are different than the viroids that were there before? What if, like, what if they are more adapted to vertical transmission, or less potentially, that.
And is the hop latent viroid A, hop latent viroid B, and hop latent viroid C? Because like with this pandemic that's been going on, there's a new variant every 2 months, and they all are more infectious than the last one. It's going to infect more people and kill more people, blah, 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 blah. And I'm wondering, is hop latent viroid going to get more infectious and more deadly and more less latent and more prominent in showing itself?
Yeah.
Like
B. curly top virus is an example of this, and it infects cannabis. And when researchers like sequenced the genome, right, of the BCTV that they found from cannabis samples, wouldn't you know it, they matched like very high, like 99%, 98%, 99.5%, I think, in different cultures anyways, to populations we already had known in like peppers and other crops that I don't remember off the top of my head. You can check out my video about that. But like, so obviously like, there's like there are mild and severe variants in that case. So and some plants, just for people who don't know, who might not be familiar, sometimes plant viruses in general, like they don't necessarily kill every plant. Some plants can have a virus in them that will just absolutely destroy some other plant near it, but not it. Maybe
that's beneficial, right? To not kill off its host is actually a beneficial aspect of a virus, because then it can live on for longer and maybe spread to other plants of the same species or other species and cause damage in some way.
Yeah, I do want to make the point that, and you're totally right. So like, what I was trying to articulate is that sometimes like it might not even be like, how do I put this? Like it might not even colonize the cells of the plant. Like maybe it's kind of like, it's not a suitable host, right? So like sometimes an insect comes in and like maybe like takes a drink and transmits some of the virus, but the virus doesn't take. Other times the virus can just live in the plant and colonize, but it doesn't give any physiological, it doesn't, for whatever we can tell at least, it doesn't seem to have any overt physiological effects. And like you say, that can make it a great host, and then other insects come in and then can vector to other plants. So you don't even necessarily know for sure if a plant has BCTV, specifically that one which colonizes like hundreds of different crop plants and uncultivated plants with no symptoms sometimes. So like, yeah, it's something to know. And like with powdery mildew, even when we do research, we want to make sure that it's the correct virulence. Like, wouldn't it suck if you did a pathology test for a powdery mildew population, but you didn't test to make sure that the powdery mildew you were using is representative, and it happened to be kind of a hypovirulent strain and wasn't very effective at colonizing, and you do a test and you're like, wow, these plants are resistant, and they're not. You just messed up. But if you don't think to check for that kind of thing, you run into problems. So like there's so many complexities to it.
So this is a little bit of a shift of topic, but automation is freedom, and a few others have been talking about it in the chat. It's been a little bit dominating the conversation over on the chat side of things. So I want to address it quickly and just give a nod to one of our previous episodes. We did a whole show on light cycles. Automation is freedom asks, has anyone on the panel veg plants with 12 and 1 schedule, meaning 12 hours on, 5 hours dark, 1 hour on, 5 hours dark? So essentially you get 1 hour of light in the middle of your dark cycle to keep the plants in veg. It's also known as the gas lantern or gas lamp routine. And it says, he follows up and says, seems great, saves 5 hours of light time at Cheap Home Grow. We've talked about this a little bit. A bunch of people tried it at Cocoa for Cannabis with very poor results. They grew smaller plants, they took longer to veg, and they yielded less. Eagle Gardens has been trying it lately. He's an HPS grower, and he has a auto flowering plant that was not an auto flower. I think that has to do with 12-1, if I had to guess. If you have a plant that's 12 on, 5 hours dark, it gets that PFR or whatever it's starting to think that it's going into the night cycle. That 1 hour can interrupt the night cycle and keep some plants in veg. However, certain plants that are often referred to as early finishers, or stuff that ends at, it will flower in 18 hours, but not 24 hours. It's like a semi-auto. It's not a full auto. That stuff might start auto flowering on you in like Eagle's case. He's running 12-1, trying to save money on electricity. And one of his photoperiod plants is now auto flowering because he's running 12-1 to save that few.
For example, Jack, what you're talking about right now in our outdoor garden, we have 2 outdoor gardens, and one of them, we have Banana Daddy out there in flower right now. It looks like it's fucking week 2 of flower, and it is fucking, we're not even out of fucking July yet. So, and everything else is still vegging. So there's always that one, you know what I mean? The one it also is super leafy, so I'll probably never grow it again outdoors. But
yeah, I mean, that just shows me this is a absolute save the most amount of money possible, not absolute make yourself the highest production, highest quality possible a goal. Because when you're looking at it, it came from greenhouses. The guy who's pushing this the most right now, his name is Joe Pietri. He's never once said the word DLI, daily light integral. He has no idea what that means. He has no idea that it exists. He has no idea that it's studied and it's well understood. He has no idea that horticulturalists are using that currently in greenhouses, and they're supplementing light. They're still running maybe not 24 on, maybe not 18 on, maybe not 17 on, but they're running the lights during the daytime and during the night cycle to get a certain DLI. And he's used to seeing people use HPS, high pressure sodium lights. And for a long time, people gave way too much light. So if you were vegging 24 hours on and 0 hours off, like Eagle was, and like many others were, or 18 on and 6 off, you're probably giving too much light, especially if you're using 1,000-watt HPS. And not that they were using those in veg, maybe they're using T5s or whatever the case may be. But if you look more into DLI, you can figure out how much PPF or PPFD your plant can handle and over how much time. The thing is, the plant can actually handle close to its 100%. Let's say 100% is 1,000 ppfd of light with 400 CO2, because that's what the Chandra et al. And many other studies have found. It's actually 750 ppm of CO2 and 1,000 ppfd. But when you double that CO2 to 750 from 400, I guess the base, it's a little less than double. You can run as high as 1,500 ppfd of light the entire time from the second that the lights turn on to the second that the lights turn off. And they can take tissue samples and show this is how much photosynthesis is happening. This is how much yield is happening. They've done these studies. They've done the science. They've done the testing. So for one guy who, granted, he's been growing for like 70 years or whatever, and he has a direct aid to all growers Instagram account, and he has the Skunk Fan podcast, and he has Eagle and all these other people trying to push you to go on to 12 and 1. Take a PPFD measurement and then come talk to me. Right. Look up DLA and then come talk to me. Because if you're running an LED at 100 watts, it's different than if you're running 1,000 watt HPS. So don't try and tell me that every single person in the planet should be running 12 and 1. I don't believe that. I've seen that it has negative results for dozens of growers who've tried it. And I'm seeing people like Eagle who believe in it and are advocating for it have negative consequences, like having auto flowering plants that were not auto flowering when they were using 24 on or 18 and 6. I use a 17-7, 17 on, 7 off, or 16 on, 8 off, because in San Diego, our time period is 9 p.m. till 1 in the afternoon. It's way cheaper than from 4 p.m. to 9 p.m. Right. So I'm trying to keep my veg cycle out of, if I was to do that whole Joe P schedule, 12 on, 1 off, the 1 hour of light in peak costs 4 times more than the off peak hours. So he wants me to run 1 hour of light during super peak in California, which would literally cost as much as 4 hours, 15 or 16 on, which I do. It's going to cost me the exact same amount as running 12 and 1. So you have to take into consideration where you live locally. Do you have time of use electrical? I do here in San Diego, but you might not. Maybe I know somebody who lives in New York, they don't pay a power bill. They have solar, it offsets, so they grow weed for free. They literally have 0 power bill. Their whole entire unit is all offset by the solar.
I know somebody like that. Yeah.
So it really depends on your situation. So don't just listen
just for everyone. Just for everyone to understand, the real food of your plant is light. That's the real food of your plant. That's what builds mass. That's what builds the weight, is light. The light is what's doing that. It's not the fucking water. It's not the fucking mineral. It's the fucking light. So suggesting to use less light and somehow making a better quality output is beyond science, is beyond what biology says.
And physics. There's the Dr. MJ mentions it in the past, but it's the law of thermodynamics. The amount of energy that was put out is directly equated to the amount of energy that the plant can use to grow. Photosynthesis, what the plant uses to grow. Photo means light. Synthesis, it's synthesizing the light. It's making that chemical reaction change. It's taking the physical light and turning it into the chemicals that it needs. So if you're giving it less of it, it can do less photosynthesis, aka less growth, less production, less yield. And there is diminishing returns. Once you get past 1500 ppfd at 750 ppm of CO2, if you go to 2000 ppfd, you'll see 4 out of 5 plants actually start to have their yields drop. So there is a photosensitivity where if you overload it, that's why I said there's that 100% level where once you get to a maximum amount, you don't need to go higher than that. But what he's suggesting, and he's stated several times, I've seen him on many different podcasts, he says less light, more yield. And it's okay, show me a side-by-side test. Show me a side-by-side test. Show me one single side-by-side test, because I know 10 growers who've done side-by-side tests themselves, and all 10 switched back.
It's possible that maybe, you in your example, Jack, what you were saying, how most back, everybody wanted to throw 1,000 watt in a 4x4 and run it low. So they were overlit. So then maybe when they switched to the 12-1, maybe that's possible that they got better yields. But I have a really hard time believing if they had proper fucking lighting at the we'll say 18 hour on, we won't even say 24. Just the speed of growth alone, you don't have to veg it for fucking three months. You know what I mean? You can veg it for a month, but
2 weeks in some cases. I know people that veg for 2 weeks.
There's so many, I can't wrap my mind around how that can work, how that's possible. I'd love for him to explain it to me. And when people say can't explain it, it's just magic, that's when I start to lose interest.
Well, he'll say plants. Let me just mention, some plants at the equator, they basically only get 12 and 12 their entire existence. So forget about even a veg.
Right.
Yeah, they just have
But that would be
that.
His
great.
flower-
Wouldn't that be
his
amazing
flower
to have a flower
concept-
room? That's your outside. That's your flower room. Your outdoor. Your
His
backyard.
flower
Right.
concept is even more crazy in my opinion.
Less.
He says to go 6 hours on, 18 off. That's his preferred. He says at most 8 hours on, at most 8 hours on. He doesn't even believe in 12-12. He thinks that's a giant waste. He's like, oh, don't go
Yeah.
from 12-1, go to 8 on, 16 off. And if you're a real pro, do only 6 hours on. And it's like,
I'm gonna be
Yeah.
honest. I tried 11 instead of 12 hours in flower, and I did feel like it got a tiny bit more terps, maybe, but the yield loss. I went
Yeah,
back
the
to
yield
12.
loss, right?
I went back
See,
to 12.
I ran 11-13 and I have run it for a while because I was running too much light. And I figured, okay, if I'm running a little bit too much light,
That
I'll run
makes
it for 1
sense.
hour less.
Yeah.
And also I read DJ Short's book about how island style, like in Hawaii, most of the year they actually get like an 11-13. And in my experience, Hawaiian bud has been some of the best that I've ever had. And it's probably more the climate, the environment, the genetics they're using, and all the love and passion that goes into it. But I tried the 11-13 and didn't see a major drop in yield. And I was seeing a little bit more color. I think that maybe the nighttime giving them more rest, I guess, gives it a little bit more time to develop maybe terpenes or some of the anthocyanins. Maybe it's just a little bit cooler during the night cycle, so more of those anthocyanins are developing. But with that said, I just this last run for the first time because it was actually because timers, my timers didn't. I clicked one too many or two too many little knobs on them, and I ran 12 on, 12 off with my main light, but I have my red lights come on 30 minutes before and 30 minutes after. So like I do like the sunrise and sunset effect essentially. And because I have the 730 nanometer, the far red and deep red combination, they essentially can go to sleep a little quicker. And everybody's told me for years and years, oh, you should run 13 on and 11 off because that way you're running more light, you'll get more yield. And I actually did that this time versus like the 11 on, 13 off. And although I got a massive ass yield, I did get some foxtailing, but it's summertime. And I will admit it was like 86 to 90 degrees for a good chunk of like mid to early flower. And only one of the plants, like the one on the right, is really heavy foxtailed. The one on the left is actually like slight foxtailing. So it was right on the borderline, I think, of like genetics and heat. But yeah.
Yeah, I think genetics have a lot to do with plants that can take the heat. Because I've had some that seem they like that above, like between 85 and 90. They're just as happy as when they're in better or what we think is better temperature.
That's like the one on the left. It's probably the second biggest yield I've ever had on any plant, and it looks like pretty dense, like golf balls with like the tiny little like crowns starting to poke out, like not a full foxtail, but you see like the little.
I don't even mind
Nubs,
getting the foxtails,
like
man. I'm
nubs,
fine with
yeah.
foxtails. As long as they're not too crazy. As long as that, like, if they're not like this long or something. If they're just short little crowns, I love seeing the crowns on the buds.
So this one, it's funny. The tops are the only parts that are actually foxtailed. I'm not like my left plant was perfect. The right plant is a little smaller and a little more foxtailed, but it's way denser. And it's funny because I almost thought there was like Hermie issues because it was getting that like really lime green, like little tips where
Yeah.
you almost see like there's like a banana shooting out. But some buds I've seen, they get that like lime green, but it's just the bud structure. And it was just like a really tight nug and it just kind of crowned out. And it only like the bottoms are all golf balls, but the top, it literally kind of looks like my fingers like this. Like you've got your bud and then like the crowns, it's super frosty. Like I'm imagining I'm going to dry sift a lot of that one just to see it because those plants in my experience are great hash makers. Because I've mentioned like if you take your hand and dip it into a bucket of sugar, and your fist is like this, there's only so much surface area, but if you stick your fingers out, it can coat your finger in all 360 direction and you pull it out and you get a lot more of that actual sugar or trichome. So
more surface.
it's interesting to see like it literally the entire foxtail is coated all the way up. So I'm like, oh man, I'm not too worried about it, to be honest. Before I even knew what foxtails were, I actually loved a strain called Griselda Blanco, named after the lady who sold cocaine or whatever. It's also called Colombian Jack because I think she's a Colombian or whatever. But my wife and I loved it. It was like kind of like an apple, like a green apple smelling sativa. And it had huge foxtails. And I didn't really know what they were, but I liked it because they would pop off the bud so easily and they grind up really nice. They like fit into the grinder real easy and they just smush down and bust up real quick. And I was like, man, I really like that Griselda Blanca. And then one of the first strains I grew when I got back into growing was Blue Dream. And it had kind of a foxtail sativa hazy structure. And I like wasn't super bummed about it, but a lot of people online are like, that looks like shit, you should restart. I'm like, whatever, man. Like I smoked it and it was fine.
Oh,
And biggest hash producer
My
ever.
buddy Baked Pone just got the Santa Cruz cut, so we're excited to see that go.
It's going to be a absolute beast.
Yeah, neither one of us have grown the Santa Cruz or smoked it, so we can't wait to.
You're in for a treat for sure. It's one of my favorites. If it's the real deal and you guys grow it well, which I can imagine both of those things are the case, then other than the actual like managing it, because it's one of those plants that will do 10 pounds outdoors in Northern California, like 10 plus, like we were talking 12, 13 pounders on occasion. And it just becomes a monster, like mammoth plant, shoots every direction. Like it's branchy, unwieldy, but if you tie it around and trellis it up and spread it out and just get enough bud sites visible, it'll be some of the sweetest, terpiest, like best highs in my experience. I love that stuff.
We're going to make sure to put it outdoor next year. Then we'll fucking try to tame the beast.
It might be a weird finisher, but I know Northern California is actually similar latitude to Michigan, and like some of the finishing times. I know. Shout out to Twisted Roots. He grows some friggin' Mendo Dope style Cali trees up there in Michigan, so I know it's possible.
Yeah, we tried to keep them smaller. We on purpose try to keep them smaller because we have a smaller space to grow in. But we just actually threw down our first prototype, I'll say. But no, it's going to be the real deal. We're going with it. But our first attempt at how we're going to trellis these things, and like worked out good. It was just a simple T-post driven into the ground. I just stood on a bucket and drove them into the ground with a sledgehammer. And we have 3 rows of, what is it, 4 plants. So it's because it's 12 plants total in there. So we have 3 rows, and so we just put 2 posts on each end of each row, and then we're going to do a trellis, one continuous trellis net over those 4 plants held by the T-post on the ends. And then we drove just regular stake, the big green stakes in the ground in the middle to help just hold the trellis net widthwise, hold it taut that way. And it looks like it's going to work great that way. So we're probably going to do 2 nets on most of the plants, and 1 row is really short. We might get away with just 1 net.
The Blue Dream will, like, if it's like your sparkle face or whatever growing next to the fence, instead of just being one little section, your entire fence will be like a bush of Blue Dream just spread, like that little device that I kind of showed that grows the plant sideways, like the Trellitech or whatever.
The big printer looking thing.
Yeah, dude, that honestly, like, it's there. We talked about creepers and like creeper highs, but then I talked about like the creeper structure. I think Blue Dream would fall under that creeper structure where it's got such long side shoots that the lower ones will actually start to like droop onto the ground and like start growing roots. And it's funny because like some of those will actually squirt back up. Ooh, Noah the Grower is jumping in. Cheers, Noah. Hopefully it can. I don't know how long he's been waiting.
So you could actually have like multiple points of like support on the ground, like trunks.
Yep. And I've seen people that will like bury them and then like it'll grow back out and you'll get like these little buds on the ground. Usually, almost always, those buds get molded. In my experience, to be quite honest, it's
being that close,
botrytis, bud rot. It's a mess down there, but it's cool to see when you actually like witness what looks like a wild jungle of a plant just sprawling over and taking over like a spot in the field. It's quite amazing.
Hey, Jack, I have Medically Fit and a few other people in the comments were talking about it. I think Steve might have mentioned it too, but I had this Instagram post. They wanted me to talk about the viroids that were found in fungus and the implications for that as a vector. If we have some time for that,
that's
crazy. We will. I just want to let Noah say hello and introduce himself, and then you could go to that. And then we've got a few other questions that I want to get to in the chat that are somewhat IPM related, and then some other stuff.
Nice.
How's it going, everybody? I'm Noah the Grower with Trees, and if I'm on Instagram there, and most weeks here. Sorry to be late, but happy to be here.
It's all right. We actually started off a little bit late as well, so we're just happy that you made it. Happy to have you, and go ahead, Matthew, take it away.
Yeah, so I don't at this moment remember if this was the original post I made about the topic, but I think that it was. So this was a post from a paper called Viroid Biology, not just for plants anymore. Microviroid species are becoming better. Or no, actually, that's not the title. I'm sorry, that was my title. But I think it had kind of a funny name like that. In any event, they had found that there were fungi that can take up hop latent viroid, or not, sorry, hop latent viroid, but viroids in general. And it made me wonder, speculate if that could also be true for hop latent viroid. And it's just kind of interesting because also I had recently found there's a tissue culture research group called Three Rivers, if I remember correctly. Yeah, Three Rivers Biotech here, and they said they found, this is a conclusive evidence, but this is interesting evidence of hop latent viroid in the guts of rice root aphids. Now, the way that aphids feed is that they put their like long needle-like mouth part in the tissue of a plant, and they drink the sap mainly. And so, of course, this is why they're such good plant virus vectors in general. And just because you're able to get it in your body doesn't necessarily mean that you're a conclusive or a really what we call competent vector for a virus. It's possible that, and there's different kinds of virus vectoring behaviors with aphids, or I guess I should say ways that it happens, because some plant viruses can like they get into the
trigger, right? It could just be like a mechanical trigger of the aphids physically hurting the plant, being a stressor on the plant that makes the latent virus not latent anymore and express. Could that be possible? Or, I mean, because how did they in their study did they test the plant to prove that the plant was clean, and then they just introduced the pest and then the plant wasn't clean? Because I'm saying, like, couldn't a stressor make a latent virus then become virulent? I don't know how to say the word virulent.
Virulent, like you mean like a virus that was already there?
Yeah. Like if it was just laying there, but it was dormant, we'll say, and it wasn't really affecting the plant in any way. But once the plant was stressed by a pest pressure, then it could come to life and bloom and take over as the plant.
Oh, I see what you mean. Yeah, well, the reason why it's not conclusive here is because they didn't go from one host to a clean host and then like actually confirm transmission, which is what you would want to do. This wasn't like a peer-reviewed research report or anything like that. But to answer your question, I think of a research report I read about. This is a little bit different because I think this was like a retrovirus in a plant, and I want to say it was it like mango spot something virus, but papaya ring spot virus maybe. And what happened was that when the temperature got a little hotter for the plant, they found that that plants that had no symptoms started to have like really impressively severe symptoms, and it was a heat stress reaction that allowed it to go from being dormant to not dormant. But that's like a very specific example for a retrovirus. But I think that it is true that for a lot of things, actually, there are other pathogens like botrytis that can be systemic in a plant. You know, how much this is true for cannabis, it's not really understood, but in other plants, at least, it can be, you guys have heard me talk about it, it can be kind of asymptomatic, and then the plant starts to mature, starts to flower, and then suddenly it becomes very virulent and sort of activates. And there's probably a lot of things that are happening, like immune responses just changing, aspects of the physiology just kind of changing, and I think those factors activating probably have some sort of triggering effect, and I don't know the mechanism. So something like what you're talking about definitely can happen. In this case, though, with the hop latent viroid, it's just kind of, I guess it's just kind of, for me, it's a good reminder about how, because there was a lot of speculation even before this came out that this is a possibility. Could aphids and other insects vector hop latent viroid? And the official answer is we don't really know, and if so, to what degree.
But it's the least likely.
I feel like it's plausible. I feel like it's plausible, but I don't know. And also, like, kind of going back to our point about like with testing and not knowing, one strain from another potentially, like it could be the case that it does happen, but it happens like 1% of the time, let's say, or 5% of the time or something. Maybe we find out that just because there's markers for viroid in the gut doesn't mean that it is like alive or active, essentially, right? Like the viroid, it might just be pieces of the viroid essentially that have been maybe enzymatically broken down or something like that. So things like that can happen. And it's I tried to be, I should probably be a lot more, I should probably have a lot more emphasis in my posts about this kind of a thing. But I did try to mention that it's not perfect proof, but it does mean that it just reminds us that this kind of thing happens, and I think serving to keep us on our toes at least is sort of a good thing. But I would like to see more from Three Rivers Biotech coming around, and they actually reached out to me and let me know that they would be letting me know what they find out in the future. So I am very curious to find out what they find out.
I'm interested as well. And we have a question or comment from Potent Ponics who says, Ethanol OMG, talk about the HPLVD powder BS. And I think we've already talked about this in past shows. There was a claim that some green powder could be thrown on your plants and it would cure them of hot plate and viroid. We've sort of debunked that, but I want Matthew to be able to expound upon that and say why maybe it's not the truest or best marketing.
Absolutely. So the problem with the problem with that is that viroids are difficult to deal with, primarily because, well, viruses are difficult too, but these are difficult because they are essentially just a really interestingly constructed strand of RNA. And to the plant, the RNA reads like the RNA that they use to create proteins for the cell. So they are functionally, they look almost exactly the same. So the little mechanisms that transcribe messenger RNA into DNA, those they get confused essentially. They take it for something else, and then they sort of faithfully create more and more copies of the viroid. And there's different versions of virus. So if you were to apply something like a powder or a chemical, because people ask, well, why can't you just spray like a viricide or something like that, or could you vaccinate your plants essentially? Could you inoculate against a pathogen? And there are things like that are kind of possible, but the thing is that anything that would affect the RNA would also affect the plant RNA, which is not great for the plant's development. You would still run into the same problem. You'd probably have a lot of mutations and sort of like especially an expression that would result from that if you use some sort of like something that would affect DNA. Like that's not great. So that's why it doesn't make sense. Now the product that I was talking about, I guess the powder was supposed to be like an immunostimulant, but again, and I've covered this in other presentations and things, stimulate the immune system is too vague to be helpful as a thing. What does it stimulate? By what mechanism does it stimulate it? How so? Because some aspects of the plant immune system can be but benefited and sort of bolstered and primed, but that comes at a cost, a physiological cost, an energetic cost, but also you can't make it's like how was a good analogy? You can make something, you can make like armor. This is going to be a weird analogy, but if you make it really sturdy and heavy, it comes with, well, if you make it very sturdy and strong, you might come with being not pliable and not heavy and very heavy. So there's downsides to that. There's physical repercussions of making armor really heavy. On the other hand, if you make it really light and flexible, you might lose that rigidity, right? So it becomes less armor-like and more like clothing or something like that. So in the same way, that's how plant physiology works. You can't simultaneously make, or at least not easily, and a lot of times these signals, they antagonize each other. So if you make a plant really short and stocky and kind of hardened off, that can be really great against things that maybe bore into the plant or are trying to chew on the leaves or other sorts of things like that. But then that necessarily means that it can't reach up really quickly to grab more sunlight and outcompete the shade of other plants, for example. So the plant, over millions of years, plants have evolved to have a bunch of different sort of reactions to things like shading pressure and herbivores and parasites that affect in different ways. And so, like, for example, botrytis manipulates the plant. It takes advantage of an antivirus response, which is to have the cell destroy itself. And it makes the plant destroy itself with the cells, and then it just feeds on the dead cells. So, like, even then you create this really great weapon against viruses, and then another pathogen use it against you. So there's no kind of winning, there's a lot of adaptations going on. So a powder is very unlikely to be effective unless they tell you in what way it's effective and how. And yeah, so.
Good point. And unless we want to go a little bit deeper onto that, I want to maybe switch it up a little bit and do another IPM related question from Shredder0911, who asks, at Shape Home Grow, I have box elder bugs outside and they eat pretty much everything outside, and birds do not seem to like them. I can kill them, but they keep coming back. Thoughts? Question mark.
Yeah, I did answer that. There's different kinds of, there's a lot of like red bugs essentially that look kind of like box elder bugs. So it sort of depends. I feel like box elder bugs tend to, if I remember correctly, they do tend to concentrate on box elder and similar
maple.
species.
Like
Yeah.
maple, those little windmills that fall. If you let those just sit on your ground, you're gonna have box elder bugs out the ass because they eat the little seed of the maple.
Yeah, I had definitely seen that too. So like, I don't think they're a big like cannabis pest in my experience. But it can be like really shocking when you have like a ton of them kind of erupt out of nowhere. And I think that
They
were
crackle
asking
everything.
Yeah, that's true too, right? I think they're even called cotton stain bugs sometimes, the group of that they're a part of, because like they're a big pest, or certain ones are a big pest in like cotton and like fabric crops. So like when they make waste, like the waste literally stains the fibers, and that's not very fun. Beauveria bastiana might be helpful for them as a biocontrol, but I don't think I would stress too much about them personally.
Velifer works good against them, according to Steve at Potaponics.
Oh, very nice.
And since we already answered that in the chat and quickly addressed it on the show, I want to go on to JP from NB's question, who says, at Cheap Home Grow, got a question about a transfer pump. Can you use that effectively for teas, IPM sprays, compost extracts, or will the impeller all the biology? I don't know a ton about your particular transfer pump or how it works, but we mentioned a little bit on past shows about different spraying options, and I really like God, I'm forgetting the name right now, but it's not a Dewey Mister. It's God, I'm blanking on the name. But if you go back a few shows and look at IPM, I could probably find it here in just a second. But it's like a sanitization project or product that has like a 20 to like 45 micron adjustment, and it's good for indoor use for small gardens. And that might even be too small for biology though. So I'm curious maybe of Matthew or anybody else on the panel's thoughts on spraying biology like compost tea or compost extracts.
I actually didn't hear a part of your sentence when you were asking what the question was. So could you repeat that?
He says, can you use a transfer pump for spraying effectively things like compost tea, IPM spray, or compost extracts, or will the impeller decimate all the biology?
Oh, okay. I see. I don't think that. I mean, the biology that is like microbial might be okay, I think. But like something like a nematode or something like that, I think would be destroyed in the process.
Or if you find any fungal, that's fucked. I mean, I don't know. It'd be broke up pretty small though. It might still be fine.
Yeah, I think like spores and canidia maybe.
Yeah, there you go. Yeah, spores will be fine. They're small enough. I don't know. I honestly don't spray my plants with much of anything unless I see an issue. I'm usually, I don't know, I'll run for some predators if I see something too crazy. But outdoors, my shit's the Mother Nature tends to show up, you know, whatever, unless it's environmental, like you start raining and stuff like that, then I might try to get some kind of labs or something to spray on my plants. But I've always just done it with a backpack sprayer, or not backpack, but a hand pump sprayer. So there's no impeller at all. It's just like the force of the water. But
Yeah, biology can
thanks.
definitely be a little bit tricky to spray. But I don't know, microbials. I've heard Brandon say that he would want a larger screen than some of like the 5 micron stuff that he's seen on some of the, I think Petra has like a 5 micron filter. But yeah, there's a bunch of options out there. Petra tools I'm seeing recommended in the chat. They're a little bit larger scale. I'd say from like larger indoor grows, like in a commercial setting or outdoor
Brandon
grows.
has a discount. Bokashi. Use Bokashi. Save some money.
Yeah,
for you in the
10% off. Code word Bokashi or Bokashi Earthworks. I'm not sure, but I think it's just Bokashi.
I think it's just Bokashi.
I bet you could ask him.
Yeah, DM him.
Yeah,
I bet you could find out. Yeah.
Yeah, it's worth saving some money. Those things are expensive, you know. Well, they're not really expensive for what they are. You can get a big backpack sprayer for like $150, and the battery lasts for a long ass time, which is pretty amazing to me. When I used it, I was pretty impressed with the battery life.
Seed person one mentions asking if the pressure from the sprayer could mess with the biology, and I suppose like that. I think that could be possible. And if we don't know what the micron size is, like you were mentioning, theoretically, I think you could have like a grading essentially that is kind of too fine. But I don't know what those physical parameters are personally.
Curious if anybody in the chat remembers the thing that I recommended. It's like a little green unit. It's handheld, plug in. I think Autoban makes it. It's like meant for disinfecting things, but it can also be used for gardening as well. And
Yeah, something junior, right?
yeah, the Fog Master Junior. There we go. Fog Master Junior.
I jogged your memory. Pretty cool.
Tao had me
Who
there.
says smokers have bad memory?
Oh man, it's the lack of smoke. I actually had to go and grab something to puff on. I
There you
picked
go.
one up and I set it down somewhere and I misplaced it, so I had to grab something else to puff on. And but yeah, that Fog Master Junior, I'll try and pull up right now just to show it off because I think
I'm
it's
good and stoned.
it's definitely one of the best options in my opinion for a home grower, just based on the size and the costs. And it is something that you have to plug into the wall. So I mean, as a home grower, most of us have an outlet nearby. But you can see there's a variety of price. Like this one on Amazon's 150, but you see PE Strong for 120, and I found like $54 here used on eBay, and it's a pretty good unit. I don't recommend the Ryobis; they're much larger as far as the size of the spray, the droplets, and as far as IPM goes, you want to make sure that you can actually get down to the small enough sizes so you're getting the application. But yeah, this Fogmaster Junior is one that I've actually even seen people use it outdoors with good effects. And I just wouldn't recommend the, sometimes it does come with its own pesticide. I wouldn't recommend using that because it's probably banned in your state for cannabis, or you just might not want to consume cannabis that's been sprayed with an ornamental pesticide product as a general rule of thumb, unless it's like approved and created for the product that you're working with, then I'd tend to avoid it unless it's something like sulfur, for example. You can get bonide, micronized sulfur and use that in veg on your cannabis plant. And it doesn't have to be like a cannabis specific spray to be effective, but it's good to make sure that it's okay to be used on cannabis before you start spraying it on your plants.
Buddy Kilowatt asks if Bacillus thuringiensis is only effective when wet. I mean, I think that's an important, sort of an important process, but what's really more important is that it gets eaten usually by the thing that's going to be killed by the BT, like a caterpillar or something, or make contact with it and somehow get into the body. But usually it's through the oral route.
The two big ones are BTI and BTK, right? Isn't BTI like for caterpillars, or no, BTK is caterpillars, or BTI is like mosquitoes or something?
Yeah,
I can't remember.
Mosquitoes and fungus gnat larvae maybe, but BTK is the caterpillar.
There we go. Yeah. And BTI, like the mosquito dunks and mosquito dips, the real cheap stuff you can get at Lowe's, Home Depot, Walmart, wherever, local box store. Amazon, whatever. That stuff, I've recommended that for a lot of people that were struggling with fungus gnats, and they had really good results with it. Watering it in, just a tiny little pinch. It's the same biology that we were just describing, the BTI, and it gets the job done. Typically, though, I would recommend getting a little bit better airflow, just allowing more time for your good thing. Maybe making use of a good mulch. I just want to check in with you guys because I bumped my mic. Is my audio still coming through good? Because sometimes it goes dark.
It is now, but you did have
There was a minute we lost a couple.
Some important keywords in that sentence were lost.
Well, damn. Sorry about that. I should try to not move so much and unplug my microphone. But you think after this many shows, we'd be good.
The strongest swimmers most often drown, Jack.
It looks like it's like unplugging and replugging itself back in. So are you guys able to hear me now?
Yeah, definitely.
Okay, cool.
Yeah,
It's
you're way better now. It's really good.
All right, good. Well, with that said, we do have another question from let me scroll up. JP from MB, who was a former panelist, he came on and visited us a few weeks ago, says, hey, has anybody tried using the magic butter machine, and is it good for making RSO?
I am not a fan of the magic butter machine, but it's funny they bring that up because it was on last Wednesday on the Let's Be Bud show. Rafusa came on and did a little demonstration of his magic butter. He made some butter, and we walked through the things we liked and didn't like about it. So that would be a good one for you to track down and watch. But
what was the biggest thing you didn't like about it?
I was gonna just say the biggest thing I don't like about it is it has a blender in it, and it just blends the fucking product into the whatever you're infusing, butter, oil, whatever. And when you do that, it's going to be so green and so it just destroys the flavor, if you ask me.
Like it's kind of all planty, kind of grass-like.
Yes, yeah, very, very plant flavor, very high in chlorophyll when you do things like that.
Like green ass butter, like it comes out literally pure green.
Oh wow!
It literally looks like, oh, that's cannabis infused butter because it is green. It's not yellow. Or
on
like
the flip side, you're going to get a good infusion because you're going to have a ton of surface area
and lots of heat. I think it heats while it's doing the extraction at a pretty high temperature because I don't think there's a vacuum. I think it's at like 140 or 200 or like really high.
It only holds so much though, right, Spartan?
Right, but you can hack the system by clarifying your butter, making sure it's a higher butter fat butter, and that just the more the fat, the more you can absorb, the more THC you can absorb.
Well, I mean, how much does it hold? Can you put like 4 ounces of trim in it?
I don't have one. I don't like the whole design.
Okay, good enough.
So I don't really
Skilbo would be a good person to ask for anybody who's listening because he has one and he makes tinctures with it, I believe. I don't think he actually uses it for butters. I think that it assists him in making his tincture to make the roller ball. So it does have some good use. And I think that there's like 50 different recipes. Like it comes with a book and a bunch of different ways to infuse a bunch of different things. So it might be worth looking into. I'm more of a RSO from
they have a cool system for gummies. Rafusa was showing on there that they give you the whole kit, but you just use the whole bag they give you. It's got all the bullshit mixed in, so it makes them taste real good. And he said he really liked the gummies to infuse those. So I mean, yeah, there's definitely uses you can use for it, but yeah, I'm not a big fan of the blender on it. I'm not a fan of blending the product. I'm okay with blending oils, but not the plant material. I don't like that blended up.
It's like the same thing with RSO. Like I'm not gonna, when I do my wash, I would let it soak for like 2 days if I want to get a thorough extraction, but I'm not gonna shake the shit out of my jar when I'm doing it.
Exactly.
I'd rather do a gentle shake. I can't imagine that. It's just like I wouldn't go through that process. Not to say that it's not going to be effective or bad. It's just different than what I'm looking for. I know a lot of people that have used the magic butter machine and made edibles and been very happy with them, the potency, the ease of it. I mean, it's literally, I think you just click a button, it turns itself on, and like a few hours later, you come back and you pretty much got finished product in certain circumstances with like the butter, for example. The gummies are also really good that you can make from it. I've had Sungrown 707, I think, made a couple with his magic. It might be a magic herb machine. Like there's knockoff versions of it that are less expensive and stuff now too.
Then I second Marcus in chat. Marcus Green brought up how you've recommended the Source Turbo, and I would recommend the Source Turbo over a magic butter machine if what you're looking for is RSO. I would get the Source Turbo because it's going to let you reclaim your alcohol. And that's a huge thing. That's gonna depending on how much you're gonna use RSO. And I feel like anybody I've ever got to try it, pretty much everybody is like on it for life. So I would consider the Source Turbo over our Magic Butter, but there's a cost difference for sure.
Oh yeah, it's a lot more expensive for the Source if you're getting the bigger one, the Source Pro or whatever, and the Source Turbo you can only make probably 1 to 2 grams at a time. To be honest, it's like a half mason jar,
Which is enough for
whatever.
most people, honestly. The average person,
Yeah. Oh yeah. Me and my
especially
wife.
a new person.
Me and my wife use it, and like I have a small little home grow in my closet, and we turn all of the stuff that I vape into RSO because it's already decarboxylated, so you don't have to go through that process. And we also will turn small buds, trim, shake, stuff that we just feel like not smoking on into RSO, and it's incredibly effective medicine. I talked a little bit on the show I did last night with Smart Poker about how I like to turn some of it into high CBN RSO, even like once you pull it out of the extract craft, in my case, I have a Source, has a little crucible that's like a non-stick surface, and you can just pour that out into something, or you can syringe it up. We typically cook it down so there's like very little or no alcohol left, and then we add our MCT oil and make it easier to syringe. But if you want to pour it off into like a silicone baking cup, you can cook the alcohol off on like a coffee warmer, like a little mug warmer that gets like so around 200 degrees. And instead of just letting the alcohol cook off, if you leave it there for like a day or two, it'll turn almost black and get like super rich in CBN and oxidize almost all the terpenes and make it way more sedating. So that's like my good nighty time medication. And I'm a big fan of RSO. It's really easy to make once you figure out the system. The machine is a little bit loud. It's got like a vacuum pump, and while it's working, it does make some noise. But in the background, you can just watch TV in the other room or something while it's running, and you come back and you check on it. There's even a little app. It like tells you the temperature and everything, and you can watch. Like I bought 1 gallon of 420 extractor, which is like corn-based ethanol from Colorado. It's organic or whatever, and they'll ship it to your door. But that made me, I want to say, like close to 50 grams of RSO, and a gram of RSO here in California in the legal market, to be sure that it's like tested and doesn't have ethanol still in it, and it's got a good amount of cannabinoids and things like that, is going to go for $50 before tax. $50 for 1 gram. And that's something that you can make with stuff that you've literally already consumed from a vaporizer. Like you're already been vape bud, you just pour it into a jar over and over and over. And when that gets filled up, pour some alcohol over it, let it soak, and then strain it off and make yourself some RSO. So it can be really inexpensive, and it can be great medicine. That's actually my preferred medicine. It's the already been vaped RSO. It's like some of the most potent, amazing stuff. I love
I
it.
like to say it's my most powerful magic.
I think that's like the magic of the cannabis. Like if somebody really, really has severe ailments like cancer or other like extreme pain, extreme insomnia, or even psychological issues, many things, it can help.
Very
And
telling.
starting with just a tiny little, drop. It could be like a grain of rice at first. And some people will work their way up to like a gram a day, which is impressive, and they'll be feeling pretty good. But
Yeah.
that's
They'll
a lot.
sleep
For sure.
a lot. They'll sleep good.
Before we let Spartan go, I want to get one more question in from JP from NB. He says, Zentanol at Cheap Home Grow, what is an acceptable pest pressure level, especially when talking about outdoor cultivations? If the plants appear happy, let me scroll. It's not scrolling. Why is my scroll not working? If the plants appear happy, are they likely still healthy plants?
Right. So I also answered this one, but it definitely bears repeating because it gets into the topics I really like to mention, which is that not just for cannabis, but for crops in general, your sort of like acceptable pest pressure a lot of times will be dictated by where you are and what pests we're talking about, because some of them are going to be more destructive than others and things like that. And on a quote unquote luxury crop like cannabis, where like there's a high, whether you want to talk about profit or not, like basically high value, right, for the product. Usually that makes the tolerance for pest pressure sharply go down, if we're talking like in economic terms. But I feel like that's also true for anything you're trying to get that that is very valuable, like in a medicinal context, right? And if the plants look fine and it seems like the yields are okay, and by which I mean it's good amount of yield, but also the quality is good, then I'm liable to say that the plant was perhaps, resistant to, that those pests. And what I mean by that, or really I should say tolerant. People have kind of a misconception about how resistance works, and I bang on about it maybe a little too much. But basically, if the plant is like succumbing in a very severe way and is like really, really like it looks really like bad from pests, and obviously you're probably not going to have a great response, with yield wise. But if it seems like there's not a whole lot of damage, that might change over time as the pest population increases. If you can do something about it, it's always, I think, almost always better to do something about it, because usually you make up for the cost by being proactive. But there are pests out there where, like, if you get them, like the box elder bug we were talking about, wouldn't really call it a major issue. If you get a couple of box elder bugs on your plant, it's probably not going to break the bank when it comes to your yield at the end of the grow season. So that sort of a thing. So it does kind of depend, but generally it's better to prevent them from happening in the first place, or get rid of them if they're a problem pest earlier rather than later.
Yeah, I would say just because they look healthy, like, because when I first started growing, when I got spider mites the very, very first time, I didn't know spider mites existed. And my yield was going down, but they never got to the point where they made webs. By the time they made the webs, the one crop, that's when I realized and found out what they were, because I was, ignorant. So they could be damages that are unseen, definitely. And like botrytis too. There's one leaf that's dead, and then you pull it out and it has no resistance. And even though the outside is green and healthy looking, it's dead on the inside. If you guys experience that, that sucks too. So I would say, that, yeah, I would say scout all the time, right? So that's an all.
Yeah, definitely. If you can afford it, like, it's almost always like, I mean, if you want to put it like, again, if you want to put it on a price point or a commercial point or whatever you want to say, it's almost always better, more cost effective for your time to like be looking for a potential problem in your crop, especially if you're a home grower and you have like one plant or 3 plants or 6 plants or possibly more than that. It's a lot easier to do that kind of a thing, so you can put in that extra bit of care, and it pays dividends, in my opinion. If you have a, like, when it comes to like pest pressure, like the treatment cost is what? It's the product that you apply, right? It's the labor, it's the time, your time that you're using, and also the stress and panic that you have about whether or not you're even going to be able to destroy this problem. All of those things are avoided if you're able to be super proactive. So honestly, it's really worth it.
Great point. And I want to give Spartan a chance to give his final thoughts and shout out. I know he's got to get over to the Michigan Bros Grow Show and let the dogs out, refill a stray, and get some water, all that good stuff. So, Spartan Grown, thank you again, as always, for joining us.
Thanks a lot, Jack. Thanks everybody for hanging out with us again. This is always a fucking fun show, and I love learning. It seems like this show I sat back and learned for a lot of the time. So super awesome job, guys, on the panel, especially Matthew. Thank you. And then thanks for the chat, man. They did a really good job asking questions. We didn't even bring people up. We were still just answering questions the whole time. I love those shows where we can just be communicating with chat the whole time, because that's what we're here for. So growers loved everybody out there. I'll be up at the Michigan Bros Grow Show here in about 15 minutes. I'll see you over there. And I hope everybody has a great day. Keeps growing.
See you, Spartan.
See you
Hey,
guys.
Spartan, keep on growing for sure. And growers love to you. Have a great time at the Michigan Bros Grow Show, and look forward to seeing you next week. Well, second what he just said with the chat, I mean, this week especially, I'm always impressed by the level of intelligent conversation that's going on within our chat, the dialogues, the questions, people answering each other before we can even get to some of the stuff, the side conversations that are springing off of the conversations that we're having on the main panel. And just really want to shout out, a lot of the listeners, Smart Poker, Real Red Hairs. We had Medically Fit in here, Seed Person One, Sal Blindberg. We just got a question from Darker, who is a newer grower. Says, I have an issue of getting poor yields, about 20 grams for a plant. Still a very nice smoke, but smoke better than, sorry, I'm scrolling and trying to read. All right, let me try this again. 20 grams for a plant. Still a very nice smoke, better than most I bought. I did a 2-gallon pot in soil. May try a 5-gallon fabric pot next time. This was only my second run. So to you, Darker, I want to say, like we just said, keep on growing. Keep growing, man. It's only your second grow. 20 grams, that's like, you're almost hitting 1 ounce per plant. Like that was a metric that I was commenting on earlier that most people will be able to hit once they get comfortable growing, and usually a little bit more than that, sometimes double, triple, or even more, depending on the size of your plants. But you are early into this. I will say a 2-gallon plant is pretty small, especially when you're growing in soil. I would definitely recommend trying out that 5-gallon pot and just, keep on trying, keep on learning, listening to shows like this and others, reading up when you feel like there's an issue. If something looks not right, aka if it's not like green and with good turgor pressure and like standing upright, usually a good idea to start looking into like, why is my plant flopping over? Or why am I getting these yellow or brown or red spots? Or why are my leaves dying off? And things like that. It's and always feel free to ask questions. I mean, you can ask questions on the show. You can always DM myself at Jack Greenstock, like you can see right here behind me on Instagram. Also Jack_Greenstock on Instagram is my backup, and on Twitter, that's my name there. If you want to email me, jackgreenstock47@gmail.com. I know this isn't like final thoughts or shout outs, but that's just how you can get in touch with me personally. I know many of the other guys on the panel have been growing for many, many, many years and have tons of experience and would love to help out when they have some free time. And we love getting new people into growing and having more success with it. And when you're at 20 grams in a 2-gallon pot, I think that there's a little bit of room for improvement. It sounds like the quality of smoke is good. You're happy with that. And I'm happy for you because there's nothing better than growing your own. So definitely enjoy it. Like I mentioned earlier, I grew some Blue Dream, this little foxtail, and people were telling me I should chop it down and kill it off. Still to this day, it was some of the best smoke that I've come across. Like, and I'm not trying to toot my own horn. It's just, I really like Blue Dream a lot. And that one was tasty. It got me the high I was looking for. It had a great medical effect. Some of the hash I still have to this day because it has a specific medical effect. It helps my hand stop shaking, which somebody with arthritis is very beneficial in certain circumstances. So shout out to you, Darker. And I'm curious if anybody else has any advice or just kind words for Darker, our buddy. And I think he's a new listener because I haven't seen that name, or maybe my memory's not the best.
Yeah, I'd say if he's in like soil, like organic, you definitely need more than 2 gallons to take a plant to any decent size to maturity and have it. Yeah, it's hard. So yeah, I would say definitely go with a 5-gallon minimum and keep keeping the same size you're trying to grow them in the 2-gallon, and that should definitely improve everything to start with. And then you could even see if you want to do more. I see people in chat saying they got 7-gallon fabric. And yeah, the bigger, depending on the situation, usually the better. But work your way up too. Yeah, we talked about that earlier.
Transplanting helps. So if you start in like a solo cup, go to a 1 or 2 gallon, and then switch to a 5 or 7 gallon, the roots will do a better job at colonizing that pot before they move on to that larger pot. It's easier to not over and underwater when you're in an appropriately sized pot. It tends to grow a little bit quicker. And some people said the light really matters. So make sure that you've got a decent grow light. I would check out cocoforcannabis.com, their grow light guide. He's got some of the best price and most fairly evaluated lights for what we're going to use it for. He hangs up the light and measures it, what it's going to hit at the canopy. So, I mean, that's what we care about. We don't care what the light does in a 3D sphere and 100% of the light that it puts off, because really what matters to us is how much of that light can hit down to the canopy. And if you're growing with something like some Amazon blurple light, you might have more success if you switched over to something that is like an all white LED or a ceramic metal halide, or even like an HPS. Like I know the Grow still kills it with those. And so Noah, do you have any advice for this guy who's on his second grow, struggling a little bit, but wants to keep at it, keep it going, and maybe get a little bit better yield on his next runs?
Yeah, I'd probably just start off with the thing that you just sent off Spartan with: keep growing, just keep doing it. That's how you're going to learn. Any questions you have, you can direct message me, Darker, and I'll help you with anything I can. Definitely, like Tal said, definitely a bigger pot, but you don't know his situation with his room. You don't know the light situation. Like you said, the improving light is probably going to be your best bang for your buck. Then if you're improving your light, most likely it's going to be more powerful. You're going to need something to help cool it probably more than you're doing now. But any questions you have, you can direct message me anytime, and I'll do my best to walk you through it.
They say that they're going to switch up their pot size for the next run for sure, is one of the comments they made. And I just want to read this comment from Marcus Green Thumb, and thank you for the kind words. He says, Jack has saved me so much cash, learned so much this last year. And I love to see that, because really like the whole inspiration of the show, the Cheap Home Grow, is to save people money. Keep that money in your pocket so you don't have to go to a dispensary and pay $60 $70, $80 an eighth or whatever it is where you're at, or just buying it in the street at however much per ounce. It's nice to be able to give people the safety, the security, and the money savings that come along with growing your own at home affordably when you aren't getting kind of scammed and conned by a few of the shady actors in the business that you might run across at certain hydro stores. But for the most part, I think once you link up with this community and some of the others associated with it, like the Cheap Home or Michigan Bros Grow Show, fucking talking shit with Eagle, and many others, embracing organics. I could go on all night long talking about great cannabis podcasts and shows, but we only have 8 minutes left, and I just want to say I'm thankful for all of them because I've learned a lot from them as well, and they've saved me money and they've helped me out, and it's just a great community, and it's nice to be around and associated with such awesome people. And like Noah the Grow here, I was talking about lighting earlier. People like to look down on HPS, but I will still always hold him and many others that I know that grow with HPS as an example of, you know, people that can crush it with older technology. Granted, HPS was sort of invented in 1978. They're still getting more efficient, and some of them are more efficient than modern LEDs that are just not using enough diodes or not using the proper drivers or proper diodes. So before somebody looks down or talks bad about this, realize that they are actually still competitive with a lot of the stuff on the market, and people like Noah are crushing it with them and have been crushing it with them for a long time. So cheers, Noah. And looks like you just had a harvest and you got some new plants in there. You're muted up in case you're talking right now.
Yeah. Oh yeah. I just flipped these ones right here. I just flipped those ones over there. And yeah, these ones right here getting really close. Oh, another 3-4 days. I'll have to take a look at it here. I think I'm probably about day 57-ish there. Could be a couple days longer on one of them, but yeah, no, it's no magic trick. It just takes work and paying attention, trying to improve, just like anything else. You know, you're not going to wake up one day and be good at shooting hoops. You got to practice. You got to practice growing. But it's just like you said, you know, it's such a great tool, and I just love that feeling of being able to crack open a jar that's yours, and you grew it, and you know it went into it. You know it doesn't have pesticides. You know it doesn't have heavy metals like some of this other stuff, and some of the stuff that you don't want to smoke. And just like you said, you can grow it, find different strains. Of my platinum strain I got that I love the effects of, and you know there's a lot of pluses to this, and there's a great community that I wish I had an advantage. Just like Tal said earlier, I've mentioned the show before, but my first time, I thought I had powdery mildew, but it was spider mites. And I had another buddy that was a grower show me that. You know, it was my first grow. I didn't know anything. And yeah, you know, you just learn and you get better as you go, man. For sure.
Yeah, that's a honest to goodness truth. I mean, if it was easy, everyone would do it, I guess, is a good saying that I've heard and relate to for sure. And this is one of those things. It's like a sport. You have to practice. You have to work at it. You have to try hard. You have to put in the time to learn the knowledge. And I want to quote Spot Poker real quick, who says, "Big respect for all growers doing anything at any capacity, a fellow farmer 100." And I couldn't agree more. One of my favorite pages that I follow, hopefully they're still around, it was called One Plant Closet Grower. One plant closet grower. He only grew one plant at a time. That was all he needed for he or she or they, I don't even know. But that was all they needed. And it was just one plant. It was actually the beauty of it. Like they had extra space in the tent around it. They could have grown more plants, probably plant count or not. It just, that was what they needed. That's what they grew. And the attention to detail, the love, the connection they had with that plant, it was just like, I still look at that page and I'm like, there's something beautiful about that. And just no matter what size your garden, no matter how many plants you're growing, if you're growing a beautiful plant, then keep at it. Keep an open mind and an open heart. There's so many really awesome, respectful, intelligent people in this community that will help you and will guide you, and will probably go above and beyond and send you free stuff. Like if you need seeds, I'm sure somebody on this panel or elsewhere in the community will hook you up. And instead of spending $100 for that first 10 pack, if you're in the US, DM me and maybe I could hook you up. But with that said, there's just an endless supply of great people in the community, Tao being one of them.
Yeah, I'll say, you know, when shit comes up, you just, you know that for a fact, stuff's going to happen. But when you encounter it, you figure out how to deal with it, and then you know what to do the next time you happen to see it. And as you go through each thing, eventually you'll get most of the things that you'll experience, and you'll be, having killer harvest. That's all. Just keep going.
Well, and never be afraid of failure and growing or in life in general, because you learn so much from the failures. It might seem like a failure in that moment, but the next time you go through that grow, you're more prepared. It's another notch in your belt. It's a tool. You're like, oh, I saw that. And now I know this might be coming. I need to look out for that. Like, what can I do to prevent this from happening again? Or how can I get in front of this thing? Or how can I do better this time around? Whether it's your drying your cure, or whether it was getting your, pests coming into your garden, and how you dealt with them, when you dealt with them, what you dealt with them with. There's so many things. Like, we just talked almost the entire show about IPM, and we could talk another show all about it in a different regard. It's endless opportunity for us to keep learning and growing. With that being said, I want to pass it to Matthew, who did an excellent job tonight with the show topic. So thank you, Matthew. And I'd like to give it over to you for final thought and shout out.
My final thoughts are going to be short here. These are two posts, this one and this one. These are two like interactions with insects that I think a lot of people don't get a lot of experience to. This first one here are ants that are they're feeding on a wound on a cannabis plant, and they're trying to extract moisture out of it, essentially, because it's hot, it's dry, it's Northern California, Humboldt in particular. So, something to watch out for if you're seeing this. Of course, if you don't know, ants also love honeydew from aphids and other insects that feed on plant sap. So, if you see this going on, or if you've never seen this going on, check your plants and make sure you don't wound them, or you might have this sort of interaction. It's not terribly problematic for the plant, but some ants will go to even further lengths. And another thing here, this was shared with me from somebody in Guadalupe in the Caribbean Sea. These are, I'm pretty sure, these are some sort of ambrosia beetle, bark beetle, they're sometimes called. You might have heard of things like the polyphagus shot hole borer if you live in California or other parts of North America and other parts of the world. They're a huge pest, big problem, kill tons of oaks and other plants. And they might be coming to a cannabis plant near you if I'm even a little bit close to being right by this identification. So please watch out. Know that there are other pests out there that maybe have never even been documented before, and consider this when you're scouting. You might come across something that you've never seen before, and maybe you're the first one or one of the first people to ever encounter it. And don't take that lightly. Share that information if you can.
What did he notice that brought that to his attention, Matthew?
What?
How did he discover it, essentially? How was he able to find it?
Leaves yellowing and the thing was just dying, or?
Oh, yeah. There were like holes in the bark of the plant. If you check out my video on my Instagram, for anyone who's curious, at the very end you can see pictures of the little small little holes in the bark. And also when he peeled it together or apart, you could see like places where the tissue had gone necrotic and brown. But I don't think it was having a lot of symptoms before that. Maybe some branches were dying and things like that. But that's what happens in bigger trees too. So it's kind of scary.
If it could take down a tree, it can definitely take down a cannabis plant. So something to look out for, and think twice before you import plants from the Caribbean.
Yes.
And with that said, I want to go ahead and pass it over to Noah, the grower.
Yeah, sorry I was late today. Got to be able to show a couple of my plants there, and enjoyed the conversation as always. Had a great time listening to all you guys, and see everybody next week.
Look forward to seeing you next week as well. Sorry, Sour Diesel got me. Actually, you know what? It's not Sour Diesel. I made that mistake twice now. This is a Super Silver Haze. So mix up my sativas on occasion. Last and certainly not least, the American one.
I'm glad you're enjoying your smoke, Jack. That's awesome. And thanks for hosting tonight as always. And everyone in chat, good to see everyone. I'm just the American one on the YouTube, and the American one _ Keens on the IG. Most of you know how to find me. And yeah, you can hit me up for any questions or anything. And we'll catch you next week. Have a great week.
Definitely looking forward to another great week ahead. I had a great time this week on the show. Thank you to the panelists who joined me this week, and thank you to the guests in the chat. who asked great questions and had a great conversation that entertained us and helped us keep the show going. I am actually very happy that we were able to get the show semi on time. I was like running really late coming home from work and literally got this running. Like I sprinted from my car to the laptop and got it going like a few minutes late. So we're running a few minutes long. And I'll take the one final question because it leads into my shout outs, which is from Seed Person One at Cheap Home Grow. Jack, what's the word on 50 strains of purple? Is it out? And no, not yet. It is still in the process of being worked on. I'm trying to make it more of a community project this time around and get as many photos directly from the people in the community. So if you go to my Instagram, check out my last post from at Jack Greenstock. There's a purple cannabis leaf, and if you swipe over, it'll show 50 of the strains that are going to be included in 50 strains of purple. If you've grown them yourself, or if you know someone who has, and you'd like to share those photos with me to be included in the book, I would love to have listener and grower submissions from the cannabis community of people that know about myself and the book and the process in general, versus just kind of going out in the wild and trying to source them down and using my own photos. So with that being said, if you want a copy of 50 Strains of Green, the first book, which is now in the second print, I call it the second edition, you can go to 50strains.com, 50 strains.com. And I guess last little bit of note is you can find me at Jack Greenstock, like I said a few minutes ago, on Instagram. Jack_Greenstock is my backup account. And on Twitter, I'm Jack_Greenstock as well. Finally, I'd love to shout out again Cannabis, like I did last night on Smart Poker Show, the cannabis friendly social media. If you're not on there, definitely check it out. I'm on there at Jack Greenstock, and I'm actually pretty proud of my feed. I post over there more because they don't delete my stuff, and I'm not worried to have my account removed like Instagram might. So you can go over there and check out lots of my posts and communicate with me over there as well. And if you're not on social media at all, feel free to email me, jackgreenstock47@gmail.com. With that said, thank you all so much for coming. And thank you to everyone who listens on the podcast afterward. Dr. MJ is not with us this week, so I'll say grow love and catch you all next week. Peace and love, everybody. Jack Greenstock signing out.